Hey everyone, and welcome to Ghosted But Make It Gay, the 18 plus podcast where things get creepy, chaotic, and just a little unhinged. I'm your host, Juno, and every week I dive into paranormal encounters, unsolved mysteries, myths, legends, and even cursed internet finds, trying to figure out if it's actually haunted or if we're all just delusional. Either way, don't expect a straight explanation. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ghosted But Make It Gay. This 18 plus podcast goes over all things spooky on the internet, and we kind of discuss it. So yeah, if you're new here, my name is Juno. I'm your wonderful host. And last episode we talked about Ouija boards. So that was more less fun spooky and more actual spooky, but this episode we're getting into something more ancient and deeply creepy. We're getting into two things actually and kind of talking about their differences. Little personal time though. I just woke up a little bit ago. I honestly should have recorded this episode yesterday, but I've been enjoying my multiple days off in a row, and I go back to work tomorrow. So, tomorrow being Wednesday the 20th. So yeah. That being said, next week episode will most likely be posted late. Will not be posted until probably the Wednesday night after, so like next Wednesday night, just because of some licensing things with the songs that I'm using and music that I'm using. It's all part of a company called Epidemic Sound that allows creators to basically subscribe to their website, and if you're subscribed at the moment of posting something with the music that you downloaded from their website, then you're good because you're paying to use those services. But I don't know that my subscription's going to go through because I completely forgot it was supposed to be getting paid tomorrow. So, whoops. But that's okay. We'll get through it. Um so yeah, other than that, I made some really good butter chicken curry last night, and I've been playing a lot of different games. I've been playing Subnautica 2 recently, and so that makes me think one of our next episodes is going to be something on the along the lines of ocean related. We haven't gotten into that yet. So we haven't gotten into any ocean related myths, legends, creepy supernatural stuff yet. So I'm excited to do that. I'm not sure if that'll be next episode or a couple episodes later. Um, but that's okay. Because today we are going to be talking about Skinwalkers and Wendigos. And their differences, because some people get them confused for the same thing, and their folklore. And then we'll actually also be talking about the science behind instinct and logic. And then we'll be getting into some stories. And we have a lot of stories, some that are pretty decently long. So this episode might be a little bit longer than we normally have. So yeah. But we're going to have a real quick disclaimer here. So first off, before we get started talking about anything, I do just want to say that I'm no expert in some of the stuff that I'm talking about. Now, I have experiences with a lot of the things that I've talked about in the past, But today I just want to make this disclaimer specifically because most of these stories and things might not be coming from someone that is indigenous or native to where these folklores come from. And Skinwalker and Wendigo stories are going to be, or like the folklore around them, are from indigenous and native folklore and spiritual beliefs. So I want to try to approach the explaining this stuff as respectfully as possible without trying to cross any lines. And I'm saying that now because if I do mispronounce something, if I do misinterpret it or say something that doesn't make sense or is not part of that tradition, I am still learning. I took some time to read as much as I can from what I found, and the one article that I did find was based off of some like religious research with a bunch of different references to university texts, encyclopedias, and different like native languages of America and stuff. So those like you know sources in this article seemed a lot better than a lot of the other stuff that I was finding. So we're mainly going to be talking about this article or these articles when we're talking about the differences and what they are. But yeah, a lot of modern interpretations are going to be different as well when it comes to people's stories. We have a lot of things nowadays on TikTok and social media that talk about like the mimic and things like that, when people are hearing things that shouldn't be there, or when they hear like their mom calling them out into the living room but they know that their mom is 40 miles away on a work trip or something, or they hear their phone ringing outside but they have their phone in their hand recording, like those things. Some people also interpret as Skinwalker or Wendigo when that's not truly the case, and sometimes people talk about Skinwalkers and Wendigos without realizing that their origins lie in indigenous folklore. So with that being said, I want to respect this folklore and these myths as best as possible. So for any indigenous folk out there that are listening, feel free. You can always give comments and leave feedback. If you leave a comment on the video or email me feedback, I would love to share that with the audience, or like most of the comments if you're listening on like Spotify, maybe Apple Music, Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. As if it lets you leave comments, feel free to leave comments so that you can discuss things that I might not have mentioned. I would really appreciate that. So with that being said, the fact that these stories and legends have lasted as long as they did based off of indigenous folklore and then now hitting modern day says a lot about them, meaning there's a fear surrounding them, and there has to be something out there that everyone is seeing that matches these myths and stories and claims that keep getting passed down by generation. So let's get into it. So, what are the differences between a Wendigo and a Skinwalker? For those of you who don't know, Wendigo and Skinwalkers are both monster type beings, almost shapeshifter ish, for Skinwalkers, or they are like shapeshifters, and Wendigos are monsters that are spirit based, that cause transformation. So Skinwalkers are more rooted in a Navajo, Apache, Hopi native tribes, and it surrounds witchcraft. Whereas Wendigos are more surrounded by the there's other tribes, and these ones are going to be hard for me to pronounce, so I'm really sorry. Abenaki, Algonquin, Algonquin tribes. There's some more, the Iroquois tribe, and then some other regions, including Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. People commonly referred to as the Chippewa in the United States. So all of these areas or tribes, and I'm really sorry for my pronunciation there, they have the folklore surrounding Wendigos. Now, for a Skinwalker is created by a medicine man or witch, normally in one of these native tribes, deliberately through different witch rituals. And I'm gonna get tongue twisted all day, and that's not good, because if I'm with a man and I need to use my tongue for something, you know what I mean? It's not gonna be good. Anyways, they are created deliberately through different witchcraft rituals, and normally it can break some cultural taboos that consist of murdering people to do these rituals to then gain the power to shapeshift into animals. Now, these shapeshifted animals normally have different qualities that seem off or wrong about them, whether it be like glowing eyes or unnaturally moving in a different way, longer limbs, like fur that is like matted and like torn, things like that, just like really creepy, just different wrong qualities. And then Wendigos are normally created as a punishment or a consequence of greed and selfishness. As the folklore goes, they are either monsters or spirit that possesses a person or a human and then transforms them into a monstrous beast. This is normally due to when the person it possesses resorts to cannibalism out in the wild in those native areas. Wendigos are normally described as like towering, emaciated, and skeletal. They have like glowing eyes and jagged teeth. They possess super like human or supernatural strength, and they're cursed with an insatiable hunger for human flesh because of that cannibalism aspect. So those are the differences. They are two completely different myths, legends, and creatures. So do not get them wrong. Part of the other folklore is that you should not be saying the word skinwalker or wendigo out loud. Because that can bring bad luck or dark energy or them to where you are. Now, I'm in the comfort of my room with my spiritual stuff with me as my protection, but I will be doing y'all the favor of saying it out loud many, many a times while discussing both of the stories here today on this podcast. So if the next episode never gets posted, then you know why. And I will just leave that with you now. Now, different the Skinwalker and Wendigos have another differentiation between them. They are two different threats to humans in the areas that they appear or live. Skinwalkers are normally like malicious or deliberate and intelligent. They want to spread fear or cause chaos or protect something to like the degree of bringing harm or sickness to others or to communities. Some folklore states that the ones that become skinwalkers will do it out of anger or revenge and then continue to do it, while others say that some are just evil and they're feared. Now, Wendigos will be purely instinctual normally. After the possession and transformation into a Wendigo, they become ravenous. They will hunt, kill, and consume anything they can catch to feed their eternal hunger, but normally go after humans that also get lost in the woods that they were possessed in. So, skinwalkers will normally have the ability to mimic voices in animals as well. So that's where you're going to get a lot of skinwalker stories from, hearing things that aren't really there, or that are there. So one of the most popular encounters that you might run into are like people that hear screaming or yelling for help out in the woods. But it doesn't sound human. It sounds like a little off, and it's kind of like fucked up and creepy. And Wendigos are normally going to be more monstrous beasts that people will like see, or might like think they see, and or encounter, I guess, like dead things in the woods that the Wendigo was eating, things like that. Wendigos are more monstrous, so they don't have like a mimicking ability. But a popular, like, I guess, picture that surfaced on the internet a while ago during the time of the creepypastas was the rake. And the rake is a perfect example of like what has been described as a Wendigo. There's also, what is it? The Until Dawn game monster that is supposed to be a Wendigo as well. So, yeah. So, moving on to the articles. These articles I'm going to do one at a time, one for Skinwalker, one for Wendigo. I'm not going to read all the way through, but we're going to continue talking about the differences by learning about their mythology here. This article I found through EBSCO, EBSCO. It's like one of the first articles that popped up, but it seemed like the one with the one of the better resources that I was quoting or using for its bibliography. And it's also most recent. So Wendigo article was published in 2020 and Skinwalker was published in 2023. And I'm going to read some of it verbatim, but not all of it. Essentially, we're just going to kind of go through and talk about like the mythology and like the religion and philosophy that kind of are like surrounds this. So starting with skinwalkers. Skinwalkers are mythological figures in the Navajo culture, regarded as dangerous witches capable of shapeshifting into animals. Known as, and I'm going to most likely mispronounce this, Yeenald Lushi, Yee space Naaltlooshii, meaning with it he goes on all fours. These beings are believed to harness dark forces for malevolent purposes. Within a broader cultural context that includes various Native American tribes, such as the Apache and Hopi, Skinwalkers are seen as the epitome of harmful witchcraft, contrasting with medicine men who use their spiritual knowledge for healing. And normally to become a skinwalker, people must undergo like a secret initiation that requires them to kill close family members or people. Now, skinwalkers can assume the forms of various animals. So there's been mythology surrounding bears and coyotes as the more prominent. Oh, I'm sorry. I just yawned there. Wow, that was a big yawn. It's not boring. I'm just still waking up. Don't worry. But bears and coyotes are normally the most prominent that we'll like see in the folklore. But depending on the traits that they wish to like utilize or like power that they wish to possess, that allows them to influence others or invoke illness or even reanimate the dead, skinwalkers can assume the forms of different animals if needed. They will often instill fear within communities, and this leads to cultural taboos. The historical response to fear of skinwalkers was significant, culminating in events with the Navajo witch purge in 1878, where suspected witches faced severe consequences for being skinwalkers. Now, witchcraft is part of the Navajo spirituality. Witch doctors, witchcraft, medicine men, a sort of spiritual spell work. And it has a long history in their culture and traditions. They definitely have different practices that are based in good and evil and can be utilized by practitioners who have learned their ways. Now, those who use the power to hurt others are called witches, and those who, in like the Navajo tradition, from what some of these sources say, and those who use their power to help the community are known as medicine men or women. Now, most witches are male, but can also be females in some stories. But witches began as like healers or spiritual guides, but eventually started to use their power for evil purposes. And the initiation rite to become a skinwalker is normally the like line that is drawn, like the evil of the evil, because they must kill a close family member. Normally, in most of these sources, they prefer sibling death. Now, skinwalkers usually appear as bears, cougars, coyotes, dogs, foxes, or wolves. Normally, four-legged animals are going to be the ones that you'll get the articles about or stories about the most. And they can always transform into another animal if needed. Now, they're called skinwalkers because they wear the skins of the animals they transform into. For this reason, in Navajo culture, to wear the pelt of it is taboo to wear the pelt of a predatory animal. Skinwalkers may also wear animal skulls or antlers on their heads to gain more power. They normally rap on windows or doors of homes, making scraping noises. So just like don't open your window or doors if you hear that. If you're a dumb person like me, don't open shit that you shouldn't open. Like our fucking archaeologists in the world opening every single mummy tomb that they find. Like, y'all need to calm the fuck down, please. Anyways, so yeah, so that's like a good rundown of skinwalkers. But for Wendigos, it's going to be a little bit different. So the Wendigo is rooted in the northern Native American lore, and is a creature associated with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. They are primarily found in the legends of the Algonquin and other indigenous people of the Great Lakes region. So, and if you know anything about the Great Lakes are going to be up in Northern America, and they're going to be normally surrounding Michigan, and into Canada, and there's a lot of wooded and forest area around them. So just don't venture off into the forest if you don't know where you're going. Cultural interpretations vary, with some viewing it as like an evil spirit capable of possession, while others suggest that it's a human that gets transformed through greed or cannibalism. Now, we already know how they're described, so but they normally will have glowing eyes, sharp claws, very tall, skinny, almost bone-like. But the Wendigo is considered a Manitou, whose name very loosely translates to evil spirit that devours mankind. The most common pronunciation of it is Wendigo. But there are other pronunciations like Ouijigo, Weijghoh is like how the pronunciation would be set up. Or a similar evil spirit in the legends of the Abenaki people is called the Kiwakwa. And the Cree have a beast they call Witiko, while the Iroquois call it Stonecoat. So there's a bunch of different names for this spirit or creature that surrounds the same thing. Now, the depictions of the Wendigo vary by culture, but they are often described as 15 feet tall, with yellow dog-like teeth and long tongues. Ugh, what that tongue do? Sorry. I just... Okay. Gotta keep a little humor in life, okay? That wasn't supposed to be disrespectful. In some myths, the Wendigo is said to like stalk its prey through forest while baiting and tormenting it before going in for the kill. And others say that the Wendigo can possess a human, transforming the person into a cannibalistic beast. In some versions, the Wendigo may be covered in ice or have a heart of ice. And this frozen heart was sometimes said to be the human who transformed into the beast. And to defeat this type of Wendigo, the human at its core must first be killed. In some folklore, killing a Wendigo could free the trapped human, but in most tales, the only release for those possessed by a Wendigo was death. Now, the Wendigo was part of a rich folklore of the region, and the tales of the beast intrigued both the early settlers and native peoples of the northern woods. Reports of Wendigo sightings are common up until the early 20th century, and they often accompanied strange deaths. In 1907, a Cree man named Jack Fiddler was arrested in the murder of a Cree woman. The fiddler said the woman was about to transform into a Wendigo, and his actions prevented her from preying on other members of the tribe. Fiddler also claimed to have hunted and killed 14 other Wendigos in his lifetime. He committed suicide before he could even be brought to trial. During one harsh winters in the 1870s, a Cree trapper named Swift Runner killed and ate his family despite being just miles from a nearby supply outpost. Swift Runner's account and similar stories have led to the belief in a mental illness called Wendigo psychosis, a condition categorized by cannibalistic delusions and a desire to eat human flesh. The disorder is thought to be culturally specific, as it only affects the native people of the Great Lakes. And some experts argue that enough evidence exists to support claims that Wendigo psychosis is real, while others maintain illness is a fabrication. And due to that mental illness, that kind of creates this underlying, is it really Wendigo or is it just someone being a cannibal? The Wendigo was first introduced in a wider culture and a wider cultural audience by English writer Algernon Blackwood with his 1910 novella, The Wendigo. And then the story recounts an encounter of a group of hunters that they have with a Wendigo in the Minnesota wilderness. In horror writer Stephen King's 1983 novel Pet Sematary, the Wendigo is an evil force responsible for bringing the dead back to life. And then the Wendigo has also been used as a character in Marvel Comics, as an adversary in several video games. Like Until Dawn, we've talked about. So the Wendigo has been brought to popular media more so than the Skinwalker has, but the Skinwalker has a lot more stories, I will say, or quote-unquote encounters that people have in real life for it. Either way, both of them have large differences amongst each other, so now you won't get them confused, so yay. But the interesting thing about them both is the way that they like conduct this fear, where, like, you know, for Skinwalkers, it's going to be a fear that's more like the uncanny valley, just knowing something's off. A lot of like neurodivergent people, and this is how we tied into my stuff. A lot of people know that feeling of instantly picking up that something is off before they can explain why. That could be the uncanny valley, or that could be instinct versus logic, and we're going to be getting into that in here in a moment. Now, the other thing is, like, a lot of horror comes from like feeling disconnected from yourself or from people or from safety. And so both of these creatures kind of play into that really well, like an isolation factor, being disconnected, and causing this chaos. The fear that some LGBT people might be able to relate to is becoming something that people no longer recognize or understand. That could be tied into like the Wendigo, when it's like something that's out of your control, since, you know, being gay is not something that we choose. Um, so like these subtle, themes that we see within this folklore, um, do, kind of come about as something that can be relatable to someone that's LGBT or neurodivergent. And I think that's like something cool to kind of point out, but can also be kind of creepy when you think about it. Now, let's talk about the Skinwalker and Wendigo um, in the idea of instinct versus logic when it comes to like encountering these things. So, instinct versus logic um, is going to be something that is very much a battle of the mind. So it's going to be more, how do I explain, like an emotional intelligence like thing. You know, instinct versus logic is going to help with like your balances in decision making and kind of moving forward with certain things. So, if you've ever found yourself torn between following your gut or analyzing facts, everyone has gone through that. Knowing how to interpret it is going to help keep you alive if you encounter a situation that could be something with the uncanny valley or a skinwalker or wendigo, or maybe anything else that could be out in the wild wanting to kill you. Now, the science is clear. Our brains aren't wired to make purely logical decisions, but emotions and reasoning kind of work together to shape the choices that we make. So, neuroscience has revealed that emotional intelligence, or something about emotional intelligence, being that our brains process emotional signals faster than logical information. The amygdala, which is our emotional center in our brain, activates before the prefrontal cortex. Like way before the prefrontal cortex, which is our logic center of our brain, ever gets started. The amygdala is already firing. This means emotions always get the first word in any decision, whether we realize it or not. A common misconception is that a good decision and that good decisions are purely logical. However, studies of patients with damage to emotional brain centers show they struggle tremendously with decisions despite intact reasoning abilities. And the reason for this is because the emotion part provides crucial context and meaning that helps people evaluate those options. So, what does that mean for the Wendigo and Skinwalker? Well, we've talked about the uncanny valley before when talking about different haunted objects in episode 3. And this phenomenon was first coined and described by a Japanese roboticist, Masahiro Mori, in an article published in 1970. I believe this is the same article that I read before. Mori identified the phenomenon as Bukimi no Tani Gensho, meaning Valley of Eeriness, in 1978. Author Jasia Rickard translated the term to Uncanny Valley in the book Robots, Fact, Fiction, and Prediction. And when we talked about the Uncanny Valley before, it was basically a term to describe the relationship between humans and something that's human-like, up to about 80% human-like, creates this emotional response that makes you feel uneasy or creates this like fear. And that's the uncanny valley effect. Now, with instinct versus logic and the uncanny valley, when someone encounters a skinwalker or wendigo, you're obviously going to if you encounter a wendigo, the fear portion of you should automatically fire, and you should either just get out of there or you should hide or something, because those are obviously have enough distinction with them that means you shouldn't be sticking around. There is no logical decision on why you should explore that, but people that are like scientific and want to know everything have maybe this other emotion inside them that is the want to know, and this emotional part of them is what's going to get them killed. Normally the scientists in most of the movies that want to keep finding out more, they're the ones who die first. Like, come on. But for skinwalkers, you will probably get emotional responses when hearing a skinwalker maybe mimic a voice calling for help, or it be like different animals. Some people that love animals like myself might be like, oh my god, there's a coyote, how cute. But then you have to make sure that you pause and not give into your emotions right away. Wait for your logic center of your brain to kind of start up and realize, okay, why is a coyote here if you're somewhere where coyote maybe shouldn't be? Does it look exactly like a coyote or a bear or a fox or a dog? Something off about it? Or like the noises that you're hearing. Okay, someone's calling for help. I'm not going to go and help them, but I can call 911 or videotape it, call for help, Get some protection before you like try to approach something that you don't know what it is. And that's on instinct and logic. Your logic part of your brain can help interpret your emotions better. So just be like, trust yourself to make the right decision, but don't act on it too fast. Let yourself sit on an emotion for a moment while your brain catches up. Make sense? Cool. Now let's get into these stories. All right. So I did a little dive into Reddit, r/Skinwalker, r/Supernatural Encounters, r/Paranormal, and found some decently sized stories that I liked. We got a couple Skinwalker stories and a couple Wendigo stories. So yeah. So we'll get started here. Honorable mention to my friend Jen that shared a little moment of when they were high a few years ago and felt like something was watching them from the woods behind their house, and all they could think of was Wendigos. So they said that it was probably just them emotionally projecting, but they were also high. So hey, could have been one. Props to you for surviving, Jen. Good job. Anyways, let's get out there to this first story. I think I encountered a skinwalker? ? So the story starts in a rural part of Arizona. Growing up here means you're bound to hear some forms of stories as you grow up. One's a folklore and myth that you generally brush off as you get older, but this I couldn't ignore. I, 22 male, Ray, and my best friend at the time, 23 male, Kaylin, would do R and K, were going to check up on my family's fence lines since a pretty rough storm had just passed. Everything had seemed fine, and we were talking to each other about stories we'd recently heard. Nothing seemed unusual or out of the ordinary, apart from some branches that had fallen into the fence. But now it was late afternoon and we were both pretty tired since we had just come home from visiting his family during the storm across the state. So we decided to fix it tomorrow and get some rest. As usual, I let my dogs, a border collie and 2 bull mastiffs, out to go protect the herds while we rested. Around midnight, I was woken up by the unmistakable sound of my dogs barking and whining. Surprisingly, when I walked into the living room, Kay was fast asleep on my couch, so I shook him to wake him up. As he came to his senses, he heard the barking and sat up. Rubbing his eyes, we both grabbed our rifles, put on our shoes, and headed outside. We approached the dogs, patting their backs and looking towards the thick trees, expecting coyotes or maybe a stray. But what I saw, I still think about to this day. It looked human. It was wearing some black shorts and a gray top and looked like a normal guy who'd just gotten lost. But something about this guy, it wasn't right. He was thin, his eyes, hell, I could compare them to the ones on my dogs, almost reflective. By now, Kay had his shirt covering his nose and he had backed away slightly. I looked at him and that's when the smell hit me, an awful rotting smell. It was nothing like the stench of waste from the sheep, but more like a dead, wet animal that had been rotting for weeks. I'd stepped back and raised my rifle, telling whatever it was, "Listen, bud, we've got 3 dogs and 2 rifles. You aren't welcome here. The road is a 30-minute walk east from here, so get moving." It didn't move, not for a while. It just stared at us. Its eyes were locked onto the barking dogs, and I could have sworn its hand was twitching, but in the sheer panic of the moment, I was unsure. Kay had started gagging, the smell most likely starting to get to him. As much as I wanted to help him, every muscle and sense of my body screamed for me to stay still and lock onto whatever that thing was until it left. So I did. I waited what felt like hours, but was actually 13 minutes. Eventually, it snapped its head back to the side and started walking. Its gait looked weird, almost rehearsed. Me and Kay, didn't sleep that night. I called a friend of mine who owed a favor to watch the farm for a while, paid him $20 an hour to keep everything running while me and Kay left to stay for a month at his parents' house. To this day, we don't know what that thing was. But one thing is for sure, we never sleep without our guns within arm's reach, and we always lock the doors. All right, so that definitely sounds like Skinwalker folklore there. You know, southern Arizona on a farm, human, smell of rotting, all Skinwalker, typical, stories. So, yeah. OP, or Ray, I guess. Just, stay safe out there. Don't provoke anything. It doesn't look like you did in this story, but yeah. Or maybe get a farm somewhere else. I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Next story. Am I crazy? I didn't know any of this existed. I watched Skinwalker Ranch on Netflix. I heard the description and an old memory hit me like a brick. One night or early morning, my brother and I were headed home, likely around 2 a.m. We live out in the country and no traffic at that time is normal. On the last leg of the trip, we ran up on something big in the road. I saw it clear as day. It was in the headlights, but we didn't see it until we were feet away. It seemed almost human-sized. It was on all 4 legs. It put me in mind of a very large, strange cat. We ran over it completely, felled it under the car. We drove about 50 feet and were freaking out. We had to turn around and make certain we didn't hit a person. There was absolutely nothing there. No blood, no marks, no fur. Just vanished. I hadn't thought about it in a long time. That could be a couple different cryptids, honestly, like different descriptions. It really just depends on where you were. And I guess if it was actually human sized, if it was fully shapeshift, I'm not sure. But I like that they mentioned Skinwalker Ranch on Netflix. That is actually a really good what is it? Series, I guess. Uh, Documenting the like ranch called Skinwalker Ranch, known to be one of the most haunted paranormal UFO activity areas ever in the United States. It is about 512-acre property in Utah's Uinta Basin. And it's owned by real estate and tech entrepreneur Brandon Fugel, and is now part of the History Channel series The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, where they are trying to get hard proof and evidence for all the stuff that's happening there. So, yeah. And we'll probably mention Skinwalker Ranch again. Maybe when we talk about more UFO style stuff. But it is it does have some public access for tourism, but there are some areas that are like off limits. So what are they hiding? Anyways, moving on to the next story. Something ran at me in the woods. Hi, I'm posting because I don't know what else to do. I feel crazy. It may not be long in the subreddit, but I'm looking for anything. I apologize for any poor writing, or if it's too long. My 19 male uncles, 23 male, family has land in western Illinois next to the Rock River and the Mississippi River. Their house is in the farm-fielded countryside a bit, and have a pond in the backyard with maybe 10 to 15 acres of woods. I know people in the area that refuse to go in those woods due to bad feelings and negative energy. My uncle and I never cared about that though, which I'll explain our experiences now and hope someone can give some kind of insight. In 2020, when COVID hit, him and I decided to make a little shelter by the pond on the outskirts of the woods. It was mid-July and the weather was lovely. We camped outside for 2 weeks straight. We cooked our food with the fires we made, built our little home, created games to pass the time, and did everything we could. It was a great time, and I had no fears or cares in the world. I spent a lot of time outside, and so I know the animals and wildlife decently well. We had planned to be out there for 4 weeks in total, but our adventure ended quicker than expected. One of our last days out there, I was sent to get more sticks for the fires. It was still light outside, but the sun was starting to go down. I'd done this many times before, and I knew the best places to look. To enter the woods, you have to walk around the back of the pond and enter a tiny path on the furthest left of the woods. There's a flimsy wired fence along that side that blocks the neighbor's property line. As you walk in, it goes uphill for most of it, and then that fence wraps through the middle of the woods all the way to the rightmost part until it comes back down. I walked up until I reached the fence in the middle and then followed it going right. Because there were big trees I knew of down that way. The fence is extremely old, and most of the trees are grown fully through it. I was enjoying the greenery and humming to myself, and it was peaceful. I then found a nice spot on the right side of the woods, maybe 15 to 20 feet from the fence, and started looking for sticks and logs. As I was doing this, it got uncomfortably quiet. There was always some type of sound, frogs or birds or insects. Yet, not a sound. And it perked my ears to listen more intently. My body felt weird, and it was like I was the center of attention for something, like something was watching me. I turned around and looked at the fence, focusing on this large tree grown through it. I'm not sure why. It's just where my eyes fixated. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes just waiting and listening. Everything felt wrong. And then I heard it. It was 4 steps, like stomps, something running on 2 feet. But it shook the ground. It filled my ears and head. It was so loud, my first thought was an elephant. But it was right there, right behind that tree. I felt my entire body freeze, an absolute terror. I couldn't explain to you how loud it was. It shook the ground. It was running at me, towards me, yet there was nothing there. I could feel almost its anger at me. Like I said, I was frozen, and so it took me maybe another 3 to 5 minutes before I had the courage to run back along the fence. Once I got back to our campsite, I told my uncle I had heard something out there and it tried to get me. To which he replied, "Oh, you met Gerald?" Let me explain now what he told me. Before I had told him what I heard, he said it was named Gerald, and told me a story from a few years prior when he and a friend were on the right side of the woods, except on the outskirts, not inside like me. It was dark outside, and him and his friend were trying to film goofy YouTube videos until everything got quiet and they felt anxious, though not sure what for. It was just a bodily reaction. They listened for anything they could, staring into the darkness of the trees, when they heard 4 steps on 2 feet running at them, and they booked it. He said it was so close to them, it felt like he was right there about to get them, but they didn't wait to find out. Now, I was terrified because he told me this before I told him what happened to me, and it fit my experience perfectly. Yet, being the young, stupid teen I was, I felt fearless and confident, so after the sun went down, I grabbed a flashlight and trekked back up into the woods. This time, I didn't make it past the left side. I entered and walked up along the fence, stopping at when it turns along the middle of the woods. The feeling was immediately back, draining all confidence. I stared past the fence into the trees. I didn't see anything, but I knew it was there. A stick broke to my left. I turned to see nothing, and I turned back and I saw it. It was 50 feet at least away, sitting in the branch of a tree watching me. It wasn't an owl. I've seen so many owls out there. Its eyes were big like one, but the glow coming from it wasn't the eyes. It was behind the eyes, like in the skull. And I could see a long, mangled body in the branch with it, like a shadow. We just stared at each other. I was frozen, knowing I was about to die. Everything felt numb. After a few minutes or maybe seconds, I don't even know, a stick once again cracked to my left, so I quickly checked, nothing, and I looked back and it was gone. I started yelling at the top of my lungs for my uncle to come get me, which he kept calling me stupid, but did. I couldn't turn my back to it, though, so I walked backwards with him leading me until we made it out of the woods. He sat me down and gave me a talking to, saying not to do that again, and that it's not something to mess with. I know this story sounds so stupid and childish, but it's not. Anytime I see woods, I get anxious, and I can't even look at his. I know what I heard and what I saw, what we heard, but I have no idea what to think, even years later. I have a follow-up story of a buddy and me going back into the woods 2 nights ago because he doesn't believe in this stuff. If anyone is interested, I'll update and tell it. So, OP. That could be a couple things that might not necessarily be a skinwalker. There are many forest spirits and malicious entities out there, but some of its description doesn't match skinwalker folklore. But yeah, I don't know. Could have been. I can't think of the name. I'm looking in the comments here to see if someone else mentions it. Oh, someone mentions it could be SF, which she's more on the sides between North Carolina and Tennessee or the nearby mountains. What does that stand for, SF? She is a monster witch who likes to prey on children by shapeshifting into one of their parents or someone they trust, then drains their blood from their kidneys. Oh, okay, well, I don't think it was that. Anyways, Moving on. This is where we get into the Wendigo stories. So, I saw a Wendigo and I wish I hadn't. I need to write this down before I convince myself it didn't happen. This happened in December last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude, lives in a cabin deep in the woods, no close neighbors, just the trees and whatever lives in them. I never minded visiting. I like the quiet, but after that night, I don't think I'll ever go back. It was the coldest night of the year, at least negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. My uncle had gone into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it, something moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, and then came the knock. Not at the door, at the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My uncle's nearest neighbor was miles away, and no sane person would be out in that cold right now. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window, and I wish I hadn't. There was something standing just beyond the tree lines. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but emaciated. With long, bony limbs, its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened, and its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own like embers buried in a dying fire. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I froze. But I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should, and then it spoke. "Let me in." The voice didn't match the body. It sounded wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed, too deep, too garbled. I ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking stopped, but I could hear it scraping against the walls outside, slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second his headlight swept across the trees, the noises stopped. He found me pale, sweating, and gripping the gun like my life depended on it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word, just nodded and checked around the cabin. When he came back, he looked unsettled. "There are no tracks in the snow," he said. "Nothing." That was impossible. I heard it. I saw it. There was nothing outside, no footprints, no marks, nothing on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent, watching trees. I left the next morning and haven't been back since. My uncle still lives there, and he told me something before I left. "If you ever hear it again," he said, "don't look, and whatever you do, never let it in." I haven't told anyone else until now, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. Now, that could definitely be a Wendigo, especially if we're taking in the folklore of it being more of a spirit or entity. When it says "let me in," it might not be talking about just the cabin, but to the person itself, letting it into that person to possess them. So, yeah, OP, don't let it in. And probably just don't go back there. And good luck to your uncle, I guess. Like, yeah, no, thank you. I will stay here, away from that. Cool. And then our final story, which will end our podcast. Hunted by a Wendigo. I posted this in the Wendigo community I'm in, but I also want to share this here to see if anyone else has any intel that can help me, since the other community seems to be pretty quiet. I realize how unbelievable this story might be, but I assure you it's entirely true. I've had countless experiences with supernatural since I was 4, and now I am 33. Thanks in advance. I had an experience with a Wendigo this fall in early October in northern Minnesota in a state forest, very close to, if not on, a reservation. I've always heard that speaking of them can draw them to you, but I hadn't thought of or listened to any Wendigo stories anytime close to my encounter. I was staying with some very dear friends, I'll call them M and C, and they have a camper in their yard by the lake for guests to sleep in. I'd walked down to the camper from the house with my miniature dachshund around midnight and found that I needed to set some things up, primarily the heater. By the time I was done getting everything in order, it was approximately 1:30. Never thought to lock the door because really I figured it's in the middle of the woods, so there was nothing to worry about. I was wrong. I had closed the curtains, thank God, and I was having trouble falling asleep because my anxiety was going mad. M and C's dogs were barking outside, and their geese wouldn't stop honking. My dog, who usually sleeps under the covers, was sitting on my hip while I laid on my side, and I could feel her turning her head back and forth like she was trying to track something outside. I tried tucking her under the blankets to calm her down, but she kept returning to her perch on my hip. I have no idea how long I laid there, I would say at least 40 minutes, when all of a sudden I heard M's voice outside the camper. "Anybody in there? And what sounded like claws dragged down the side of the camper. I almost called back to her when I realized, 1, she and C were both fast asleep by now, and 2, M knew I was in there. She wouldn't ask if anybody was. Suddenly, I noticed everything had gone absolutely silent. The dogs and birds had stopped carrying on. The gusts of wind had even stopped. It was the kind of silence you hear about in horror stories. How the woods go mute when something evil is in the area. Then another thought hit me. My dog would be losing her shit and barking at the door if that had been anything human. She was frozen on my hip, dead quiet, shaking. I didn't dare to move, but I was really starting to have to pee. And I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. I have no idea how long I laid there, debating whether I should get up and use the bathroom and lock the door, but it felt like an eternity. I guess it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it may have been a skinwalker at first, but remembered they don't mimic the voices of your loved ones that lure you into the woods. Wendigo do. Either or could mimic voices, though. OP. I knew these creatures, demons, whatever they are, can lure humans out of their bodies, out of their abodes, if they make eye contact with you, and everything in me was screaming to make sure I didn't look outside. I made doubly sure I didn't look through any cracks in the curtains as I walked softly to the front of the camper, very slowly turned the lock, praying and holding my breath. Made sure to keep my eyes away from the windows as I crawled back in bed and pulled my dog close, and she finally stayed under the blankets. I snuck a peek at my phone for the time before I laid down, figuring it had to be close to 3 a.m. It was about 2:30. As soon as I laid down, the wind kicked back up and M&C's basset hounds erupted into howls as they came running down to the camper and a little ways into the trees, and the geese started their noise again. I heard the bassets come back to the camper, barking a few more times before they laid down outside the door to protect me. I didn't get out of the bed again that night. I told M and C what happened the next morning. I think I was hoping M would say she had come down to check on me and my dog, but she confirmed what I already knew. I said a prayer over their house, the camper, and all of us the following night, and had an uneventful night, thank God. I also spoke with another guy who's familiar with the supernatural to see if he knew any more about Wendigos. I'm not sure how accurate that information he gave me was, or if it's reliable at all, but when I asked him about why my dog hadn't made a peep, he said Wendigo can control animals to keep them from alerting their owners about its presence. He told me, 1, they can't enter houses that aren't made of wood directly from the forest they're hunting in. Tents and campers included, because they consist of man-made materials. 2, a lock is useless. They can unlock and open a door so they can try to lure you outside. And 3, they typically stay in the woods, but they will come into a smaller town, but never into a city. I had never heard of any of what he told me before, so again, I can't speak for accuracy, but I also haven't researched the claims either. He also advised me never to go outside to pee at night if I ever go camping, and to bring a bucket or something to use, and to make sure I always close tent flaps and curtains before falling asleep. He said if the flaps are open so you can see outside, the Wendigo can make eye contact with you and draw you out. After leaving M&C's to go to my father's house for a few days, I had a distinct feeling of being watched when I took my dog outside after dark. My father lives 3 hours away from M&C, and his house is in the country. I told myself it was only fear from the experience, and what I know about the Wendigo triggering an overreactive imagination. I never heard anything, and I watched my dog's behavior very closely, and she didn't act like she had in the camper. I'm moving back to that area from Canada, and this experience has been weighing heavily on my mind. I've been trying to find any information about warding them off, or if they have a home hunting range like cougars do, or if they move on from a region. My prayers did work the second night, so I figure I can pray over the property. I also have holy water that I can use, since a Wendigo is an evil spirit that possesses people or physically manifests. Frustratingly, a majority of what comes up in searches is utter garbage, like Wikipedia. Does anyone know if a Wendigo stays in one area, or are my concerns about it coming back when I get moved in the cabin warranted? Am I worrying excessively? Do you have any tips to warding them off? Well, OP, you definitely don't have all the information that you need for Wendigos. Some of your assumptions, I'm not sure where they're coming from, but there are some comments that are trying to give them some advice about the spirit stuff. And the indigenous tribe stuff, so hopefully they got the advice that they need. But yeah, I don't know. Why people that like love to camp in the woods all the time like that. I enjoy camping once in a while. But some people like that do it, I don't know, shouldn't, that aren't experienced to the stuff in the area, or if they've like heard stories or things like that. Even like, I guess maybe I'm just too superstitious, right? If I go camping, or if I go somewhere and I've heard a story of something supernatural, I'm going to make sure that is the first thing in my mind, and making sure that I take precautions for that, because I don't want to die. Now, I would love to experience it, see it for myself, but I'm not dumb. So, yeah. There you go. Now that we've got all our stories out of the way, let's close out this podcast. Now, honestly, I think everyone's had a moment where they've been outside, especially at night, and they just felt something was off, or like you weren't alone anymore. But Wendigo and Skinwalker stories, and where they take place, normally is going to be around indigenous areas or heavily wooded areas. So there are other entities in the night that could be out there watching you, that aren't just a Wendigo and a Skinwalker. So just be careful when you depict certain things, because you don't want to bring that bad juju your way. So next episode, though, we are going to be talking a little bit more into something in the wooded areas, something spooky and scary, and that is going to be all of them. So the next episode is going to be talking about haunted forests or haunted woods. Kind of mixing in Skinwalker and Wendigo possibly to some of these other stories, but I kept mentioning that there's other entities out there that might not be a, Wendigo or Skinwalker. And so we're going to dive into that next episode. So we're going to go over different wooded areas and they're haunted, and stories and myths like the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina, um, the Appalachia Mountains in the northeast of the U.S., um, the Pinelands in New Jersey, and their Jersey Devil. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode, though. And if you've ever had an experience that's supernatural of any sort, whether it be in a wooded area, a skinwalker, or a wendigo, or any of our past episodes, please, 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 please send them to me. I will absolutely read them. They will absolutely go on our episodes. And you can send them to me at ghostedbutgay@gmail.com. That's going to be ghostedbutgay@gmail.com. All one word, ghostedbutgay@gmail.com. Send me your stories to that email so that I can share them to everyone else. And yeah, I will see you all next week. You have a lovely evening, and be careful when you're out in the woods.